Hello, I'm Elda Hartley, and I made the film you're about to see, so let me tell you a little about it. I've been involved with film for over 60 years. I started out as an actress, but quickly figured out that a future as a Hollywood has-been would be pretty grim. My late husband and I started our own production company, launching a long journey through the world of independent filmmaking. For the first 25 years, we focused on corporate productions, sponsored films, films for money. For the last 30 years, I've dedicated myself to films on spirituality and healing, making them for love, not money. I've traveled the world documenting the great religions and traditional cultures, probing the secrets of yogas, mystics, and folk healers. And it's fair to say I've been working in this genre longer than almost anyone. Being a labor of love, these films have given me the courage to follow my bliss, as Joseph Campbell would say. And some of the best thinkers of our time, like Margaret Mead, Joseph Campbell, Alan Watts, Bernie Siegel, Houston Smith, and Deepak Chopra, have understood this mission and enthusiastically participated in my films. Zen, the best of Alan Watts, is a perfect example. Alan was the West's leading interpreter of Eastern thought and had written many books on Zen Buddhism. I used to call him the Pied Piper of the New Age. This film captures the best of the 7 that we made together from 65 until his death in 73. In fact, I owe my career to Alan, since he was generous enough to narrate my first film, and it was his glorious voice and his wisdom which led to its success at the American Film Festival, where it won a blue ribbon. This encouraged me to continue making films like this. And I sincerely believe that we can be helped by listening to the still small voice within. I hope this film will make it easier for you to hear that voice. In his many books, Alan Watts stressed the importance of developing self-awareness and sensitivity.
But I'm not sure at all that what we need at this time is an increase in the power of the human mind, because that's a technological advance very similar to what we've already accomplished in physical technology. And if we've abused that in a hostile spirit against the world, we can equally well abuse psychic technology. I think what has to happen is a change in understanding. It's not a matter of power or of muscle or of energy. It's a matter of the way in which we understand and feel our own existence, not as strangers in a hostile universe, but as integral parts of that universe, as fruits of the universe, in the same way as an apple is a fruit of a tree. We are a fruit of this galaxy. We belong to it. We're something it's doing. But we don't feel that.
Among the most important developments of the 20th century has been the meeting of East and West. The philosophical aspects of this meeting were furthered by persons like Alan Watts. In his writings and lectures, Alan Watts touched the hearts and minds of people everywhere with an understanding which made the wisdom of the Orient available to a wide public. His insights and humor continue to inspire us. It's signed by Richard Adams, a professor of philosophy at Quinnipiac College.
The person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts. And so he loses touch with reality and lives in a world of illusions. By thoughts, I mean specifically chattering inside the skull, perpetual and compulsive repetition of words, of calculations and symbols going on inside the head. For as a result of confusing the real world of nature with mere signs such as money, stocks and bonds, title deeds, and so forth, we are destroying nature. This is a disaster. Time to wake up. For what is reality? Obviously, no one can say. Reality isn't material, that's just an idea. Reality isn't spiritual, that's just an idea. Reality is You see, we all know what reality is, but we can't describe it. Just as we all know how to beat our hearts and shape our bones, but cannot say how it is done. To get in touch with reality, there is an art of meditation, of what is called yoga or dhyana in India, Chan in China, and Zen in Japan. It is the art of temporarily silencing the mind, of stopping the chatter in the skull. Of course, you can't force your mind to be silent. That would be like trying to smooth ripples in water with a flat iron. Water becomes clear and calm only when left alone. So, will you try an experiment with me? Simply allow your ears to hear all sounds around you. Don't try to name or identify these sounds. Just hear them as you would listen to music, as when you hear a flute or guitar, without asking what it means. You must understand that in meditation we are concerned only with what is, with reality, nothing else. The past is a memory. The future, an expectation. Neither past nor future actually exists. There is simply eternal now. So don't seek or expect a result from what you're doing. That wouldn't be true meditation. There is no hurry. Just now you're not going anywhere. Simply be here. Live in the world of sound. Let it play. That's all. In the world of pure sound, can you actually hear anyone who is listening? Can you hear any difference between all these sounds on the one hand and yourself on the other? Naturally, we use various techniques and gimmicks for helping the mind to be still. And one of the most useful of all is the gong. For it has a sound which is at once pleasant and compelling. And I want you to listen and watch what happens when the sound fades away. The one sound becomes the many. The single tone is transformed easily and gently into all other noises. And that's how the universe comes into being, out of the one energy underlying all events. So, if you don't have a gong, you can use your own voice. And use a device which is called by the Hindus and Buddhists a mantram. That is to say, a sound or word or phrase which is sung for the sound rather than for its meaning. And chief among these is the mantram Om, A-U-M, called the pranava, because it comprises the whole range of sound from the back of the throat to the lips, and is so called the sound of God. So why don't you sing it with me, or hum it with me, taking the note from the gong. Now you can hear all sounds as Om. They are all at some point in the total range of sound, from the back of the throat to the lips, making a spectrum of sound as all colors are originally one white light. But don't ask what the sound is or what it means. Just hear it and dig it. Hum with me again. Let me explain again what we're doing. We're going behind words, names, numbers, beliefs, and ideas to get back to the naked experience of reality itself. And at this level of awareness, we find no difference between the listener and the sound, the knower, the known, the subject and the object, or between the past, the present, and the future. All that's just talk. What is really happening is and you may wonder how I can keep the sound going for so long a time. It depends on regulation of the breath, which is basic to the art of meditation. And I'm going to show you how to do this and why. To begin with, just as you've been letting vibrations in the air play with your ears, let your lungs breathe as they will. Don't as yet attempt any breathing exercise. Don't force anything. Simply allow breathing. Now, is this breathing a voluntary or involuntary action? Or both? Or neither? Just feel it without taking sides, without words. And again, hear my voice as if it were wind in the trees or the sound of waves. Meditation has no purpose, no objective, except to be entirely here and now. It isn't something you do to improve yourself, to get ahead in the world, or to prepare yourself for life. For the division of time into past, present, and future is a trick of words and numbers. All memories and expectations exist now, and now only, because now is what there is and all that there is. We could say that the past flows back from now, like the wake from the prow of a ship, and then, just like the wake, vanishes. As the wake doesn't drive the ship, the past doesn't move or propel the present, unless you, here and now, want to insist that it does, and so give yourself a perpetual alibi for every kind of irresponsibility. But I'm not preaching. That would be a diversion from our feeling centered in this eternal here and now, from feeling it directly as the reality. Meditation, it's best to sit on the floor or the ground on a cushion, either cross-legged or in the lotus posture if you could manage it, or as I'm sitting, which is kneeling and sitting back on my heels, which I find the most convenient. This position is slightly uncomfortable. There is a certain amount of strain on the legs, but the advantage of this is that it keeps you awake. You should have your spine comfortably erect. Not tight, not slumping, but just evenly erect, and your hands resting on your lap, palms upwards, one upon the other. And then you settle into this position so that you, in the same way as we learned to let the breath settle itself out when you breathe out, so you learn to relax into this position and settle down comfortably on the ground. And you will discover that if you take it easy, time will disappear, and that you will be able, as judged by the clock, to sit in this way comfortably for, say, 40 minutes to an hour. Once again, the essence of the whole art is to feel, to experience what is, what happens, without saying anything to yourself about it. So let your breath flow easily, heavily, down and out again. No strain. after it has come back once more. Well then, who are you? What is you? What is I? Some people say it's this body, others the mind, the ego, or the soul. But all those, body included, are names and notions. Can we experience the self directly, like a sound, a flame, or any other object? Let's assume that all ordinary ideas of what myself is are either so wrong or so doubtful that we must investigate the matter directly. But to do that, you must first get the sensation, the feeling of yourself without forming any idea. Regard words in the head as mere noise. Relax your tongue and let it float easily in your lower jaw. Just stop, look, and listen.
This is Japan, a country in which man and nature have learned to grow together in harmony, where houses don't stand out like sore thumbs, and where the land is loved and carefully farmed, where a cooperation between man and nature has been achieved, which is very largely the result of a form of Buddhism known in Japan as Zen. A form of Buddhism which is really a blend between the Buddhism of India and the Taoist philosophy of China. The latter particularly emphasizing the fact that man is a part of nature and instead of trying to conquer nature, must cooperate. And here is the Buddha. Not a god to be worshipped and obeyed, but a man like ourselves, called the Buddha as a title, meaning the man who woke up, who attained what is known throughout Asia as supreme enlightenment or awakening from the illusions under which ordinary people suffer. The Buddha is shown sitting in meditation in perfect peace and stillness, because it is through meditation, which in Zen Buddhism is known as Zazen, or sitting Zen, that one clears one's consciousness and is enabled to see the world as it really is. Meditation consists in stilling the mind and shutting off the stream of incessant chatter, the stream of thoughts which constantly goes on inside our heads and distorts our view of the world, calling attention only to tiny details and preventing us from seeing things whole. Through Zazen, one comes to a stillness which is exemplified in this sort of garden, which is at the monastery of Nanzenji in Kyoto by the great Kobori Enshu, famous for the gardens that he designed. Notice that it consists mostly of sand, of rocks, moss, and a few bushes. The sweeping emptiness of the sand, showing the value which Buddhism sets upon emptiness, upon space, which to most of us is mere nothingness, but it's understood in Buddhism that without space there can be no solid. Space and solid generate each other. In the same way, the tree, as a Zen poem says, manifests the bodily power of the wind. For without things against which the wind could move, by its transparency and invisibility we should never see it. And as the trees call forth the power of wind, solid things call forth the power of space. Now it's a fundamental principle of Buddhism that all life is changing and flowing away like waters. This is not a pessimistic doctrine, as if everything is just going its way to death. It is rather that life itself is change. It is a process of flowing. And we are mistaken when we try to resist this process and stop the flow by clinging to ourselves. We waste an enormous amount of psychic energy in anxiety in trying to resist the flow of life. But that is just like trying to possess this living water by catching it in a bucket. And we find that in the bucket it is no longer flowing, and in time becomes stagnant. Therefore, it is absolutely fundamental in Buddhism to allow oneself to flow with the stream of life. Really, there's no way of preventing it. And trying to prevent it is like trying to swim against an overwhelmingly powerful current. That way one drowns. But by flowing with it, one ceases to waste energy resisting it, and all that energy is available as new energy for creative work in art and life. A Zen poem says, the waters before and the waters after, now and forever flowing, follow each other. It's basic to Chinese philosophy that death is part of life, just as space goes with solids. To resist death, to resist change, to resist transience is to resist life itself. And to come to the feeling as a result of this resistance that you, as a human being, are in some way separate from life, that you don't belong in the universe, that you don't express its fundamental energy as waves express the existence of the water. Through Zen Buddhism, man has learned to cooperate with nature. Man is nature becoming conscious of itself. And this extra power of consciousness which man has enables him to cooperate with nature, to bring out the potentialities of nature in a far more beautiful form than they may even be found in wild nature itself. Thus, the Japanese garden is a supreme example of this collaboration. There enters into it discipline and hard work. But this hard work is, as it were, flowing with the stream, cutting the wood with the grain, developing nature in the directions along which nature is already going. Art is conceived in the Far East not as a work of conquering nature, but as a work of nature. We don't know where it's going, right? We don't know where that path is going or where the stream is flowing. It goes on and it disappears. Just as we disappear in the moment of death. But that nothingness, that unknown into which all things flow, is very like space, which also seems to be a form of nothingness. But just as there cannot be rocks and trees without space, so there cannot be life without death. And the Buddha sits and almost smiles at it. Thus, every human being, as distinct from being a stranger in the world, is a form of the world's energy, like ripples in water. Isn't it strange when we watch natural creatures, fish, water and its patterns, plants, that they never seem to make an aesthetic mistake? The fish are never inelegant in their motions, and this is why artists love to copy them. But from our point of view, it seems that in human life there are indeed mistakes, that we are crude, gross, and move awkwardly. Nevertheless, from the standpoint of that stillness of mind which is cultivated in Zen, we learn eventually to see the life of human beings in just the same way as we see the life of the fish and the trees. A Zen poem says, New Year's Day, nothing good or bad, just human beings. For from this point of view, the conflicts in which we are involved are really the same sort of conflicts which we find throughout nature, where the fish eat the flies, and the flies eat something smaller than themselves, and eventually man eats the fish and the fish becomes the man. All life is indeed a mutual eating society. But from the point of view of Zen, this continual flow of life from one form into another is again not something to be resisted. For Zen is like judo, the gentle way, whereby forces that seem to be working against us are overcome not by opposing them, but by going with them. In the same way that the tree bends with the wind, the bamboo is not blown down because it's elastic and it doesn't stand rigid. So everybody is a wave of the life energy. And just as the wave manifests the energy of the ocean, so the human being is a wave. The universe waving in such a way as to say, hello, look, I'm here.
Once upon a time, there were two brothers, one rich and one poor. The older brother, who was the rich one, decided to take a journey around the world. And the younger brother, who was poor, decided to take a journey around his own garden. And this is just what Elder Hartley has done in making this film. It's all from her own backyard, noticing what people don't ordinarily see. For the great problem of civilization is to come back to our senses. We say to a person, come to your senses, when he's acting crazily or unwisely. But the trouble with all civilized peoples, both of the East and of the West, is that they confuse what comes in by their senses with the words and other symbols with which they describe them. The world itself isn't words. It isn't concepts. It isn't ideas. It's true, of course, that words are physical noises. But even the very notion that the world of nature is material or physical is in fact a philosophical concept. It's a network of words. And the real world, which philosophers are always struggling to define, can never be defined. It's not material, It's not spiritual. It's not mental. It is what it is. The great semanticist Alfred Korzybski called it, rather amusingly, the unspeakable world. For this world is a multidimensional network of all kinds of vibrations, spectra of vibrations, vibrations of color, vibrations of sound, vibrations of texture, vibrations of emotion and feeling. And when we are babies, we experience it just as a whole muttering jazz of different textures of experience. As we grow up, our elders and betters, our parents, teachers, uncles, aunts, and peer groups tell us what vibrations are good and what vibrations are bad. And naturally, because as little infants we are very impressionable, we believe what they say. They tell us, for example, that we really ought to go on living, so that when we get sick and have a fever, they stand around the crib and wring their hands and give us the impression that this is a dreadful thing. Of course, it isn't necessarily dreadful at all. A Zen Buddhist poem says, "The morning glory blooms for an hour, but differs not at heart from the giant pine which lives for 1,000 years." What difference does it make whether an event be long or whether it be short? Whether a flame burns dimly and slowly for a long, long time, or whether it's just a brief and intense flash. This, said T.S. Eliot, is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. And G.K. Chesterton countered him, saying, "You may go off with a whimper, but we will go off with a bang." So we become prejudiced. We accept the standards of our culture, the concepts and forms of our language, and confuse them with what is actually going on. Most people in our present culture would rather have money than wealth, would rather eat the menu instead of the dinner. But the important thing is to be able to come back to reality. After all, if I talked all the time, I would never hear what anyone else has to say. And similarly, if I think all the time, that is, talk to myself inside my head, I won't have anything to think about except thoughts. I'm not saying that thinking and talking aren't important. They're very important. But one must, after all, have something that isn't thought and that isn't words to think about and talk about. Otherwise, there is no grist for the intellectual mill. And hence the importance of meditation, as it is understood in Zen, which is from time to time, not all the time, but at certain times, to stop thinking altogether and simply be aware of what is. This may be done very, very simply by becoming aware of the play of light and color upon your eyes. Don't name anything you see. Just let the light and the shadow, the shape and the color, play with your eyes. And allow the sound to play with your ears. As you listen to my voice, don't try to make any sense of what I'm saying. Just be aware of the tones, and your brain will automatically take care of the sense. Relax your tongue in your lower jaw, because every thought in the head goes with a very slight tension of the tongue. Relax it. And don't try to stop thinking. Don't force anything. Just let your mind think whatever it wants to think about. Just let your eyes see whatever they want to see, and your ears hear whatever they want to hear, and let go. And let your lungs breathe as they want to breathe. Don't force your breath. And you will notice that in this state of consciousness, there is no past. There is no future. There is only now. Basically, the patterns of water, air, fire, and even the rocky earth all follow the same principle, for even granite was once liquid. Always these patterns demonstrate energy going by the line of least resistance, which is hardly ever a straight line, the shortest practical distance between 2 points, for people in a terrific hurry, like the roads which the Romans built for their armies. Almost invariably, nature wiggles. Of course, that is of watercourse. There is a point of view from which everything that happens is natural, from which we can see that all happenings follow the line of least resistance. The disasters of human civilization may perhaps be compared to floods and earthquakes, or to the swarming of locusts, or to battles between different communities of bees. Sure. But if you understand this, if you realize that energy follows the way of water and the course of least resistance in any case, and that there's just no other way to go, that understanding begins to make a difference in the way you think and behave. You begin to live with an attitude of not pushing the stream, of rolling with the punch,
of not forcing growth, and in general, of easy does it. There are, of course, exceptions, in that we may prefer flowers to weeds, canaries to vultures, or fertile land to the desert. Then feel that we must use effort in the sense of force to straighten out and correct the world, to cultivate this and get rid of that. But when this attitude is carried to an extreme, and force is reinforced by immense technical power, we begin to wonder about pollution, erosion, ecological imbalance, overpopulation, and the senseless waste of wealth in military technology. The abstract painting in motion. Painters taught us to see landscape, which before the Renaissance was generally overlooked, at least in the West. So that today, a realistic painting of landscape makes sense to everyone. But new generations of painters are giving us still other visions, such as these. But it all comes down to water, the material mater, mother of life. The designs within it are the prototypes of all physical forms, even the hardest of which are sculptures commemorating its flow. This is the way of water. How soft and weak it is, though heavy. You can neither compress it nor cut it with a knife. As that old Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said, it always seeks the lowest level, which men this life. Its energy is its following of gravity. And from so doing come these astonishing forms and patterns which fascinate artists and which are now fascinating you. On the other hand, most people seem to be afraid of the course of least resistance. They call it spineless. Did you ever look at a spine? Or devious, unmanly, not upright and straightforward, or just plain lazy. But notice that this water is not inert and limp like a wet rag. Notice that its forms are not messy like garbage strewn over the street. For to discover the way of least resistance, the true direction of gravity, one must be most alert and sensitive. For to be natural is not, as is so often thought among us, to be merely crude, capricious, or vulgar. Does any of this waterscape remind you of Main Street, with its billboards, gas stations, and junkyards? What is most interesting about waves is that except when they break on the shore, the water itself is only going up and down. It isn't moving horizontally. It's the wave that goes along, not the water. A whirlpool in a river seems always to be there, but it is never for a moment the same water. Actually, in the long view, it's the same with the very rocks. For as some poet has said, the hills are shadows, and they flow from form to form, and nothing stands. So what about you? The seemingly substantial continuity of your body and mind from day to day is like the motion of the wave across the water, a fabulous illusion. Because these are the basic designs of the stars, the oceans, the mountains, and of your own bodies, there is no reason to try to go against nature and conquer it, as if you were something separate from this whole universe. One who sails a boat does not try to conquer the wind, but learns to go where he wants to go by going with the wind. You are this universe, looking at itself. There is not you on the one hand and it on the other. There is simply this eternal happening. And what we call night, death, and nothingness is just the trough of the wave.
Even Buddha, the awakened one, the master of life, had to die. But why do we say had to die? And why did even his disciples weep? We say had to die, as if death is something that happens to us against our will, because we divide our whole experience into two parts: what we do and what happens to us. And according to the doctrine of the Buddha, this is the great illusion. There's really no difference, as the joyous ones in the heavens know. What happens to you is called in Buddhism your karma, and that is a Sanskrit word which means doing. What happens to you, as well as what you do, is fundamentally your doing. All the Buddhist sages have known this. But when we say it's your doing, it's not the ordinary you that you call your ego or your conscious mind. It's a deeper you than that. It's the you at which point you are one with nature, where man and nature form a single pattern of activity, one process. Just that man is a little bit more complicated than the trees, but he goes with them. And the whole thing is one single process. It isn't that nature pushes you around, or that you push nature around. If you're awake, if your eyes are wide open, and you look at things freshly, instead of with your ordinary patterns, ordinary ways in which you've been taught to think, you see that the whole process of life is something that just happens. The Buddhists call it tathata. We translate that suchness, just like that. And so when death comes, it's just like the winter. We don't say there ought to be no winter. That the winter season, when the leaves fall and the snow comes, is some kind of defeat,
something that ought not to happen, something which we should hold out against. No. Winter is part of the natural course of events. No winter, no summer. No cold, no heat. Just in the same way, there are no valleys without mountains. And we don't praise the mountains for being high or blame the valleys for being low. We don't praise straight trees for being straight, or curly trees don't get blamed for being crooked. The whole world is, in the vision of Buddhism, like music. If you think that the world is going somewhere, that there are certain things that are supposed to happen, and there are certain things that are supposed not to happen, you never see the way it's like music. Music has no destination. We don't play it in order to get somewhere. If that were the way, the best orchestras would be those who got to the end of the piece the fastest. Music is a pattern which we listen to and enjoy as it unfolds. In the same way, where's the water going? Where do the leaves go? Where are the clouds going? They're not going anywhere. Because all nature understands that the point of the whole thing is to be here. To be wide awake to the now that's going on. So when you listen to music, you don't try to hold in your memory what has passed, nor to think about what's coming. You listen to the pattern as it unfolds. And so watch it as it moves now. It's a dance. And dancing is like music. For when you dance just to dance. You don't aim at a particular place on the floor that is the destination of the dance. You listen to the music and you move your body with it, just as at the moment your eyes are following the patterns of the water. Your eyes, they know they're not going anywhere. The idea that there's something that ought to happen, that is a purpose to it all, is just words, just a thought in your mind. And in order to see all this, you have to stop thinking. If you were to hear what anyone else has to say, you sometimes have to stop talking. And thinking is just talking inside your head. So if you're going to have anything to think about, you sometimes have to stop thinking. Just as if you're going to have anything to talk about, you sometimes have to stop talking and listen. And the secret of the Buddhist view of life is to spend some time every day in which you don't think but just watch, in which you don't form any ideas about life, but look at it, listen to it, smell it, feel it. When you don't try to cling to it, as if it was something different from you, then your whole life has about it the sensation of flowing,
like water. It always goes away, but it always comes back. Because away and back are two sides of the same thing. Let it go.